How would you feel if you spent almost half a century in prison for a crime you didn't commit? Imagine your life stripped away, your voice silenced, your innocence disregarded. The bitter reality of wrongful convictions is a heavy burden, a cruel twist of fate that shatters lives, leaving in its wake a trail of shattered dreams and broken spirits. It's a dark corner of our justice system that often remains unseen, yet its impact reverberates deeply. Today, we delve into the story of Cleve Heidelberg, a man who faced this harrowing reality. On a fateful day in 1970, a police officer was brutally murdered during a botched robbery at a movie theater. The perpetrator fled the scene, leaving chaos and panic in his wake. But it was the discovery of Cleve Heidelberg's crashed car that marked the beginning of a grave miscarriage of justice. Picture this: a quiet man who had lent his car to an acquaintance, unaware of the grim events that would soon unfold. Heidelberg was discovered by the police not as a concerned citizen but as a prime suspect. The officers didn't pause to question the inconsistencies, the missing links in the chain of events. Instead, they unleashed a wave of violence on Heidelberg, beating him until he was unrecognizable. Meanwhile, the crime scene told a different story. Witness descriptions didn't match Heidelberg, and the police log was riddled with discrepancies. Most damning of all, a telegram from the Federal Bureau of Investigation stated that Heidelberg's fingerprints were nowhere to be found on the murder weapon. Yet these glaring inconsistencies were ignored, brushed under the rug in the rush to close the case. The police had their suspect, and they were unwilling to consider any other possibilities. It was as if a narrative had been crafted, a story written with Heidelberg as the villain, and no one was willing to rewrite it. Despite the glaring inconsistencies, Heidelberg found himself on the wrong side of the law, a chilling reminder that sometimes justice can be blind in the most terrifying ways. In a courtroom filled with tension, Heidelberg stood trial for a crime he staunchly claimed he hadn't committed. The trial proceedings were a spectacle of injustice. The defense found itself battling against a suggestive lineup where Heidelberg was singled out under dubious circumstances. A telegram from the FBI was suppressed, a critical piece of evidence that stated Heidelberg's fingerprints were not found on the murder weapon. Despite this, the trial marched on, ignoring the glaring inconsistencies in the case. The police log and witness descriptions further contradicted Heidelberg's involvement in the crime. Yet these discrepancies were overlooked, painting a narrative that was far from the truth. Heidelberg's pleas fell on deaf ears, his protestations of innocence drowned in the cacophony of a narrative that seemed predetermined. The verdict, when it came, was a crushing blow. Heidelberg was found guilty. A life sentence was handed down, a life to be spent behind bars for a crime he did not commit. Appeals were lodged, habeas corpus petitions filed, but to no avail. The wheels of justice seemed to turn, but for Heidelberg, they were stuck in a perpetual loop of injustice. Convicted and sentenced to life, Heidelberg was left to fight for his innocence within the cold walls of a prison. Decades later, the battle for Heidelberg's freedom found new vigor. Two figures stepped into the fray, attorney Andy Hale and Amy Hijawi, determined to unearth the truth buried deep within the folds of the justice system. They knew they were up against a formidable past, but their resolve was unshaken. They reopened Heidelberg's case, meticulously sifting through the murky details of the past. Their diligence paid off when they discovered a telegram from the FBI, a crucial piece of evidence that had been conveniently overlooked. It stated clear as day that Heidelberg's fingerprints were not present on the murder weapon. This was a game changer. It was proof that the police had withheld critical evidence, a revelation that sent shockwaves through the halls of justice. But the surprises didn't stop there. James Clark, a name that had lurked in the shadows of the case, finally stepped into the light. He confessed to the crime, admitting to borrowing Heidelberg's car, engaging in a car chase with the police, and ultimately committing the murder. This was the final piece of the puzzle. The narrative that had been crafted around Heidelberg began to crumble as the truth finally began to emerge, and so a judge ordered a new trial. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation, the air heavy with the weight of decades of injustice. The wheels of justice, once stalled, began to turn once again. After 47 long years, Heidelberg was released on bond, awaiting his new trial. His battle for freedom had been long and arduous, but the end was finally in sight. Freedom, however, came with a hefty price for Heidelberg. After 47 grueling years, the iron bars finally parted, but it was a victory laced with sorrow. Despite the years stolen from him, Heidelberg carried a heart full of positivity and gratitude. His spirit, unbowed by the trials he had undergone, was an inspiration to all who knew his story. Yet fate dealt him a cruel hand, for he passed away merely 10 months after tasting freedom. Cleve Heidelberg, a man wrongfully convicted, spent his last few months as a free man, leaving behind a legacy of resilience and hope.